Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, America, Israel, and the settlements in East Jerusalem.
Was insulting.
The media's role in the war of words. Did reporters get the story straight in Nigeria?
Mostly Christian villages.
Was it a religious fight or something else? Thailand's prime ministers, old and new, are going at it in the media, old and new. And the fictitious animated story behind Google Earth.
Photograph the entire planet from every angle.
We begin with a story of what diplomats euphemistically refer to as a frank and full exchange of views, one that was fought out over the media. The issue, the decision by the Netanyahu government in Israel to build 1,600 new housing units in East Jerusalem on Palestinian land. The Obama administration would have opposed the decision no matter what the circumstances were. But the fact that the announcement was made during a visit to the country by the American Vice President Joe Biden was seen as a slap in the face of the U.S. The news media fed on the story. For Palestinians seeking to draw attention to what they call the ongoing theft of their land, the diplomatic fallout was a godsend because the settlement issue was where Palestinians wanted to be, in the headlines. That's our starting point this week. The badly timed announcement, the impact it had on the rosy image of the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, and what the reporting of this story says about how the media cover the settlement issue.
The U.S.-Israel relationship is still on shaky ground.
This whole crisis started when Israel announced plans to build 1,600 new homes in this part of Jerusalem.
Stories of political conflict are covered every day in the media. The reason this story became big news is that the conflict is not just between Palestinians and Israelis over settlements. It is between Israel and the United States.
A diplomatic crisis with Israel.
The American media likes conflict. There was a really good story here.
The U.S. and Israel are at a crisis point today.
Right now, it's all about damage control.
I think the drama of the events and the coincidence of the timing created an automatic story for the media.
This time I was amazed with the amount of coverage, especially the negative one vis-a-vis Israel's behavior.
They are irate about it, they condemned it, they think it really undermines the process.
This was not the first time that Israel, under the Obama administration's watch, has announced the building of new settlements on Palestinian land. It has happened 5 times before. However, the presence of the American vice president in Israel changed the whole media equation.
Well, just imagine if the announcement of the settlements had taken place and Biden wasn't there. I think the settlement announcement wouldn't have got much attention at all. The attention came because it was seen as a slap in the face at Biden.
He was ambushed by the announcement.
If they announced it a week after Biden left, there would have been no story.
That's really what's interesting here, is the flip from expectation of a trip that expressed solidarity to a trip where the story that came out of it was, this is an insult.
An affront, it was an insult.
That really was very dramatic. I still think the U.S. would have expressed the same policy, but the media may have covered it differently.
The Obama White House, like administrations before it, has been unapologetically supportive of Israel. And the American media have long been seen as soft on Israel and its policies. Softer even than Israeli media are when they cover their own government. On this story, however, there was a distinct change in tone from both U.S. political leaders and media messengers, such as when the Secretary of State was interviewed on CNN about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Do you blame him for that? Well, I don't have any reason to believe he knew about it, but he is the Prime Minister. It's like, you know, the President or the Secretary of State. When you have certain responsibilities, ultimately, you are responsible.
The administration used the media to get across a very strong message that they were furious.
The announcement of the settlements the very day that the Vice President was there was insulting. I mean,
when Hillary Clinton used the word insult, when David Axelrod, who is #2 person in the White House and who is Jewish, went on television, his face was angry. They were sending a clear message that they are furious and that times have changed.
The U.S. media generally follows the line of the United States government and describes settlement activity in the terms that the United States government describes settlement activity. This time they picked up on this new and different and very bold language from the Obama administration.
So here's the question. Is it time for the United States to get tougher with Israel?
CNN allowed Jack Cafferty to read viewers' comments.
Dana writes from Oregon, yeah.
Which were mostly critical of Israel for almost 5 minutes.
Palestinians, I don't understand what the Israelis hope to prove by any of this.
That's a long segment by CNN standards, especially when it comes to criticism of Israel. Even Israeli media was critical of what had happened. The Israeli paper Yediot Ahronot published that Biden had privately complained to Netanyahu that Israel's behavior was starting to get dangerous for the United States. That Biden made such a statement has been denied by the White House. Nevertheless, this statement has left an impact on those who follow the Arab-Israeli conflict closely.
And Israeli media reflected on one of the most striking aspects of this story, the PR blunder, committed by a government that runs what is considered to be the slickest, best organized public relations machine in the Middle East.
I'm sure it's very disappointing to the media advisors of the Prime Minister of Israel as to how and why the settlement announcement was made at that time. I'm sure there is some serious self-reflection going on among the most senior media advisors to the Israeli government right now.
Israeli media, as most of the Israelis, doesn't want to see conflict with our strongest and best ally. The settlements as it is not a big issue in the media coverage. It is a big issue when there is international crisis.
واستمرار إسرائيل في سياستها القمعية.
On the Arab side of the media street, there was plenty of coverage, but it had a skeptical quality to it. Even though the tone the White House is using and that the American media are echoing is different, right now this is still a story about what is being said as opposed to what is being done.
What the Arab media will be impressed by are actions on the ground. How do the lives of the Palestinian people change? How many settlements are there? How many settlements are built? How many settlements are evacuated? I think that's what the Arab media will be impressed and inspired by. Actions are more important than words.
And having heard the words, what the Arab world wants to see from President Obama is a change on the ground, a change in the policy on Israeli settlements, a change that Palestinians can see and believe in. Here's how our Global Village voices see the media's role in the settlement story.
The media is focused on the tension, and rightly so. But the bigger story is that Netanyahu has come to America not with his hat in hand seeking forgiveness, but rather as a champion who has stood up to the weakened President Obama. And while he sought to convey his anger against Netanyahu's settlement expansion by canceling public appearances with the Israeli Prime Minister, the message in the media's reporting is Netanyahu has far more friends in Congress than he needs in the White House.
The real power in the United States is with pro-Israel forces, so there's been very little substantive objection. And in the United States media, there's been almost no objection at all, again, except for the actual timing of the announcement. But we have 30 plus years, almost 40 years of settlement construction to prove that the U.S. not only doesn't object, but actually largely supports settlements in occupied Palestine.
Our Global Village Voice platform can be therapeutic for anyone who has a beef with the way news is reported in the media. If you would like to vent on our air, the best way to get in touch is through Facebook and Twitter. Just look for the Listening Post pages there. We've got thousands of people already signed up. That's where they go see what stories we're working on so they can weigh in. Or you can get with the program by reaching us through our email address, listeningpost@aljazeera.net. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Thailand's Prime Minister Abhisit Vijayjiva is using all of the mainstream media outlets at his disposal to take on former leader Thaksin Shinawatre's online challenge to his government. The Prime Minister has blitzed global news channels CNN, BBC World News and Al Jazeera with a sudden string of interviews to counter street protests against the coup in 2006 that toppled Shinawatre from power. Shinawatre has been using the web to orchestrate the protests, calling people out onto the streets. Prime Minister Jazeera also gave interviews to 2 Thai channels that are under his control. State-funded channels in Thailand have been accused of biased coverage of the protests by underreporting the number of people involved and giving more airtime to government spokespeople than to protesters. It's official. Google has left mainland China and is now directing Chinese web traffic through its Hong Kong-based operation. The move comes after a long and bitter standoff between the internet search giant and the Chinese authorities. Google has said that it's offering an unfiltered service to the Chinese people from Hong Kong. However, the website is still being heavily censored. The relationship between the U.S.-based company and China blew up on February 18th when Google accused the government of coordinating a sophisticated cyber attack on Google's operations, an accusation that Beijing denied. China has used its state-run media to accuse Google of abandoning its business principles and becoming a political tool of the American government. Google's critics outside China say the company is getting what it deserved for agreeing back in 2006 to self-censor news searches in order to gain access to the booming and lucrative online market in China. Ethiopians who were wondering why they were having trouble tuning into Voice of America radio now know that their problem wasn't technical, it was political. Their government's been blocking the broadcasts. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Meles Zenawi admitted the occasional jamming of VOA signal at a press conference in Addis Ababa and says that his government is considering blocking VOA's Amharic language broadcasts altogether. Zenawi accused VOA, which is beamed out of Washington and funded by the U.S. government, of, quote, engaging in destabilizing propaganda, unquote. He went even further and compared VOA to Rwandan radio broadcasts in 1994, which were widely considered to have helped ignite the genocide there. VOA denied the allegations and called the comparison unfortunate. The media freedom advocates, the Committee to Protect Journalists program director in Africa, said, invoking the Rwandan genocide is an excuse to silence legitimate criticism and scrutiny. The CPJ also said that the Ethiopian government is adopting draconian methods of limiting independent coverage as the country prepares to go to the polls in May. Just in case you thought our reporting of the state of the newspaper industry was all doom and gloom, Britain's Telegraph Media Group, TMG, has announced a profit for its latest financial year of around $80 million. TMG, which publishes the Daily Telegraph and Sunday Telegraph, was coming off a $23 million loss in the previous year. TMG says its move back into the black is down to better cost controls and what it calls the successful integration of its print and online operations. U.S. newspaper publishers such as the New York Times company, Gannett, which publishes USA Today, and McClatchy all recently reported profits despite continued drops in their advertising revenues. Like TMG, these companies are getting out of the red after making huge cuts in staff and spending. The question is, how long will readers continue to be loyal to publications that have fewer reporters, photographers, editors, and news agencies working for them? We're back after the break with a look at violence and tragedy in Nigeria and the shortcomings in the way that story's been reported.